So shalom, everyone. My name is Holly Rosen-Fink, and on behalf of all of us at WJCI, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our community town hall. There's a global refugee crisis, as you all know, and so tonight you'll hear the broad strokes as well as the more narrow local strokes of what's going on and how you can help. Our hope is that you leave with a better awareness of refugee and asylum seeker crises in various parts of the world, from Ukraine to Afghanistan to the southern border, and of course here in the United States, directly from three of our key resettlement partners, HIAS, IRC, and IRIS. You will also learn about opportunities both for direct involvement and advocacy throughout the evening. So for a few quick housekeeping notes, we are recording the session, as you can see, and we will be sharing the link after the session for you to share with others. We do want you to mute while our speakers are talking. And also, please put your questions in the chat box. We do know that a number of local politicians signed up for this event. I'm not sure if they're here yet, but we do want to give a shout out to some of them, including State Senator Shelley Mayer, Westchester County Board of Legislator Catherine Parker, and a very good friend to all of us, Westchester County Executive George Latimer. We thank them for standing up for human rights and social justice for all. I'll be back later to talk more about WJCI and what we're up to. But now I'd like to pass the microphone to our WJCI colleague, Marty Michael, to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Holly. So we're gonna have three people talk tonight for about 10 minutes each, and that will leave us time for some questions, because I think one of our topics is something that everyone does have questions about. We'll talk about Afghanistan, we'll talk about Ukraine, and possibly get also to the southern border and elsewhere. One of the issues that everyone will talk about is the difference between a sponsor circle, a welcome circle, and a host group, because there are a variety of ways to help new immigrants to this country, whether they're refugees or asylum seekers or other. And we do want to get clear how each is going to work locally. So first up, we have Brenda Valdez Robles, the Deputy Director of the International Rescue Committee on General Refugee Response, Afghan Response, and Work in Resettlement. Brenda.
Thank you so much, Marty. And thank you, Holly, as well. And thank you all for having me at this town hall. I think I'll just start by giving a bit of a background on the IRC and then move into the topics that Marty just described. So for those of you who don't know, the IRC is one of 9 agencies contracting with the US Department of State for Refugee Resettlement Services. The IRC in New York has been operating since the mid-1970s. And in addition to refugees who we help resettle when they first arrive to New York, we work with all types of immigrants and the broader immigrant community. So these are unaccompanied minors, asylum seekers, asylees, survivors of torture, as well as Haitian and Cuban entrants. So it's really a broad population outside of the refugees, and in particular, the high-profile refugees that we have been hearing about in the news over the last 9 months. So to pivot a little bit about speaking, I work on the APA, the Afghan Parolee Assistance Program. Thank you, Holly. Just to speak a little bit about our response. So we resettled in New York City, 5 boroughs, and outside of New York City, some areas in Westchester, about 200 Afghans who came through the Operations Ally Welcome. And as you all know, this particular group was particularly exposed to a lot of trauma in this airlift that happened in August and September. And it was a very difficult and challenging resettlement experience for all parties involved, for the resettlement groups, for the agencies involved, and for our clients. And as you may know, most refugees wait in a third country for 3 to 5 to 6 years before they're resettled in the US. And this was not the case here. So this was a very difficult transition for all involved. So we've gotten over the resettlement piece for the most part with these APA clients, and we're still struggling in terms of helping them sustain their housing, helping them find employment. So just because the resettlement piece has ended to a certain extent, there is the longer term resettlement that we're all still very much working towards and supporting these clients achieve. And then on the broader refugee resettlement space, over the last 3 to 4 months, we have welcomed refugees from Ecuador, El Salvador, South Sudan, China, and other places around the world. So we're still receiving refugees outside of the Afghan group. And also, as we pivot and look at the next crisis with the Ukrainians, we have been partnering with NILAG, the New York Law, I want to say, assistance group. And we have been going with them to do this humanitarian parole presentations they've been doing for the Ukrainian community, and explaining our services in terms of the various pathways that Ukrainians can arrive to the US. And so we're talking about Lautenbergs. We're talking about these humanitarian parolee applications and trying to connect these Ukrainians to services in our office. So as I said, we support immigrants of the broader community, and they don't need to have a particular status to have access to some of our services. And what that includes would be school enrollments, school advocacy support if there are children in the family. We also have a summer academy that we've been able to enroll newly arrived Ukrainians in. We have ESOL classes as well. And we have career pathways for those Ukrainians who are at a higher English level with degrees that will be able to plug into longer term career goals. Unfortunately, as you may know, they may not be able to have access to like a work authorization right away, but that is something that they would be able to work towards depending on the pathway to their permanent immigration status. And that's something as well that we can help with applying for a work authorization. So that's sort of the overview of the services that we provide, the types of immigrants that we support. And if there are any questions, I'm sure we'll see them either in the chat or at the end. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, I was going to say exactly that put your questions, I already have one in the chat about the different ways that people who are boots on the ground here, volunteers can help with that. Okay, next we have Ann O'Brien, who's the Director of Community Engagement for Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services, which we refer to as IRIS. Ann, it's yours.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to say thanks again to everybody in your coalition and initiative for continuing to stay engaged as we all pivot once again. I think we should all collectively agree to call it whiplash. So, because I think everybody's a little over the word pivot. But just to say that it is amazing that all of you have stayed engaged and that your leadership has continued to keep conversations going with so many different organizations. With IRC, Brenda did a great job of describing everything that IRC does, as well as HIAS. It's just really neat to see so many different organizations brought to the table, because that is what we're all about now, right? Everybody here is all about reversing the trend of the previous 4 years. And it's a good thing we started as a group, a community, to do that before we got to this point, because clearly last fall and now we needed more people engaged, more organizations doing more. And the US government has started opening up new pathways. And that's what you all have been hearing about. So what I want to do is really quickly tell you what HIAS does, because Brenda gave a great overview and we're just a much smaller version of IRC. But I do want to kind of put us within that framework for all of you. And then I want to talk about the things that you've been hearing about and kind of put those within a place for you as well. So really quickly, Brenda did a great job of describing that International Rescue Committee is one of 9 national organizations that have a direct contract with the State Department. So that's the best way to visualize it. If you think about the State Department and they contract with 9 national refugee resettlement and other immigrant organizations. And then those national organizations contract with agencies on the ground. And sometimes they build those organizations. Sometimes they contract with them like us. So we're a standalone small not-for-profit in Connecticut that is one of those organizations on the ground. We actually contract with Church World Service. That's one of the 9, just like IRC, just like HIAS, who you're going to hear from Rebecca. So that's where IRIS, this little bitty organization in Connecticut, fits in terms of the big framework of all these organizations. But everything that you heard Brenda describing in terms of what they do, they welcome people through the Refugee Resettlement Program. They work with asylum seekers. They work with people that don't fit into all those other categories of immigration. IRIS does as well, but just in smaller numbers, whereas IRC is a large national, multinational organization. So we do it in the New England region, but we do those same things. We don't just welcome, but we also provide additional services outside of the normal contract. So the reason why I ended up on your screen tonight, you're kind of like, well, gosh, why do we need this little organization that's in New England when we've got HIAS and IRC? The one thing that we did really differently about 6 years ago is when everybody like you all rushed to help for the Syrian crisis, instead of our little organization saying, you know, I'm so sorry, we have enough volunteers, we have enough people to drive to medical visits. At that point in time, we said, wow, y'all are very smart and very capable people with lots of life experience. Let's take this community sponsorship model and put all of you into these groups and let you welcome families from Syria and other countries under our oversight. So we have this broad network. That's the only thing that's super different for us as a little bitty affiliate on the ground, a little bitty organization. We have this statewide network that we've had for 6 years now of over 50 groups that have been resettling many years, many different nationalities, all volunteers like you all, but they do it under a really clear structure. So that's why we're on your screen, right? Because we do all these things at a small level, but we also have this really robust model. So I'm going to set that aside because that's enough about IRIS and what we do, because we do a lot of the same things as IRC and HIAS. What you all are questioning is, how do we get to help Ukrainians like we all wanted to help Afghans? It's super confusing, right? Because Biden and Harris have said 100,000 of them can come. Where are they? And you heard the news that some of them were flying to Mexico and crossing the southern border. That did start happening because there was a new immigration pathway opened up. So that's the key for you to think about this. There's one thing in terms of how the US government allows people to immigrate to the US. So that's an immigration pathway. What we as organizations have to do is figure out, once those people get here, how we organize volunteers to help those people, right? So what the Biden-Harris administration did was opened up that humanitarian pathway, and you're thinking that's just like what they did for the Afghans. Very similar, but just not as many benefits, and they required that there be a fiscal sponsor, somebody that was going to say they were going to cover the expenses of the Ukrainians coming in. They didn't do that for the Afghans because the US government brought them all here. There was no conversation to be had. Remember, they were arriving in 24 or 48 hours to the communities because they were already here. So there was no conversation about this family needs a sponsor, that had to happen once they got out to our communities. So that's the key difference with these two populations. But your question should be, again, so where are the Ukrainians? Well, as soon as the US government realized that it was creating a similar problem by just allowing the Ukrainians to cross at the southern border, they realized that they should set up a different pathway, and they have set up a different portal for people to apply to be fiscal sponsors of these Ukrainian families. And they needed to manage better the inflow, is the short answer, right? They also realized that the key difference between this and Afghanistan is that a lot of the Ukrainian folks could get out of their country. They could go to Poland, they could go to Moldova, or they had the means to get a ticket to come here. The Afghans did not. Their government shut the borders, right? So that's a key difference. And so the US government realized that as much as the Ukrainians need help, those neighboring countries are helping them, and they could allow the 100,000 to come, but they could make sure they had a fiscal sponsor. So that is happening right now, and we'll give you, your organizers, a follow-up link to send out where you can find more information about it. But the key difference right now for those 100,000 Ukrainians that are being allowed to come into the United States is that before they can be allowed to come in, they have to now have a fiscal sponsor for the duration of their humanitarian parole, which is going to be 2 years. So literally, a group of individuals or a family is going to have to apply directly to the federal government, not through my agency, not through Brenda's, not through Rebecca's, but directly to the federal government to become a fiscal sponsor. And they're going to have to be matched with somebody they either name, or at a later date, not right now, they might be matched with a Ukrainian that they don't know. But for right now, they're trying to make sure families here can say, I will be a fiscal sponsor for my family or my close friend that I can name that is a Ukrainian. So I know this is still a lot to digest. If you're kind of like, gosh, why isn't there clearer information on it? Because it's being built as we fly it. So literally the US government is finishing the details, and there might still be some legislation to pass that changes it. So when you ask, gosh, I trained with IRIS, or I trained with HIAS, or I trained with IRC to be a co-sponsor group for Afghan families under APA, but I haven't been matched yet, or I'm not sure, should we be serving Ukrainians? The training that you went through for community co-sponsorship to work with us or to work with IRC or HIAS was great training. You will be matched with a family, because the Biden-Harris administration, in addition to the Ukrainians through this fiscal sponsorship, plans to continue to raise and raise again the number of refugees coming into the US. So do not feel like all the training that you've put in has been put aside because of a slowdown or because of this new pathway. Believe me, the numbers will continue to go up. It's just that the US government is working on fine-tuning pathways to provide more ways for them to come. So 2 websites you're going to want to watch, and again, we'll send you the links, is both ours. Absolutely keep an eye on all of ours. You've got our organizations, but you can also keep an eye on sponsorcircles.org and welcome.us. But there's one last thing I want to say to all of you. Once you go through the training with one of our organizations, if you can possibly bear it, try to stay with that organization, because all of our organizations have been asked to take on a great deal in the past year, and we are all rising to the challenge. And when we train a group, that takes resources, right? And we make commitments to the federal government on how many we'll take based upon that, how many families. And so if you can figure out within your groups to remain super patient and stay with the organization that you originally trained with. You can change later, but it just means if you keep changing from one organization, you won't necessarily get a family faster. We're all going to have plenty of families to welcome in the coming months and years. Trust us. It's just that the US government is setting up different pathways so that they don't crush organizations again like they did in the fall. I'm going to pause there. I hope that was helpful, Marty.
I was just about to say, I don't know about everybody else, but that was very helpful for me to really clearly understand what's going on right now and why things seem to be slowing down, but it's not really a long-term halt. So thank you. Thank you. And finally, from HIAS, Rebecca Kirstner, who is the Senior Director of Grassroots Organizing. HIAS will talk about Ukraine, the border, and advocacy. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Marty. And thank you, everyone. It's just delightful to be on this call with Brenda, with Anne, and I think maybe we've all done a good job of explaining that in different ways. All three of us are part of the wider organism, let's say, that is the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, and also the wider community of humanitarian organizations helping people who flee for their lives in search of safety and protection, you know, locally, nationally, internationally. And it's also just, I have to say, just delightful to be on a call with WJCI. I feel like I've been part of this peripherally since its inception, and I'm just amazed by what this group has been able to accomplish. And I just want to thank you, all of you, for coming back and coming back and coming back and doing all that you do. So thank you for inviting me, but also just thank you for all of that. I want to just quickly say, since this is a Jewish organization, you know, and HIAS is a Jewish organization, that, you know, I really feel like for Jews, standing with refugees in this time is an act of recognition. You know, it's an act of recognition of the commonalities with our own stories, honoring our own history and our present, and upholding, you know, Jewish values. It's an act of welcome, it's an act of courage and of love. And for me, it honors my namesake, Grandma Becky, who arrived in the 1920s through Ellis Island, my grandpa, who arrived from Cuba 20 years later, my wife's Holocaust survivor family, and just so many HIAS clients that I've met from around the world who have moved from one country to another in an act of bravery, resilience, and dignity. And so I just want to thank you for being part of the wider Jewish response to the refugee crisis. HIAS is an international Jewish refugee agency. We're the oldest refugee agency in the world. Like Brenda, we are also one of the 9 refugee agencies that resettles in the United States. We have almost 100 offices in 16 countries, providing aid to refugees. And some of that looks like we're on the Greek island of Lesbos, serving refugees crossing the Mediterranean. We're in cities all along the US-Mexico border on both sides of the US and Mexico sides. 13 refugee camps in Chad, serving survivors of the Darfur genocide, in 9 countries in Latin America, serving people displaced from Venezuela and from the Northern Triangle mostly. So what we like to say, and you've all heard me say this before, I know I've met half of you, is we like to say that once we helped refugees because the refugees were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are. So I'm going to try to fill in a little bit. I don't want to repeat anything that's been said. So I'm just going to bounce around here a little bit. As you all know, refugees come to the United States in 2 primary ways: seeking asylum or resettlement. At this moment, we are in a policy fight, a fight for our lives to protect the right to seek asylum at the southern border. It is slipping away, and I would say that there is basically no asylum at the southern border, and it is horrifying. There are currently 2 policies that are basically preventing people from activating their basic human right to seek asylum. Title 42 and Remain in Mexico, which is also called MPP. Those two programs together basically mean that when someone comes to the border and they say that they're fleeing for their lives, that if they are turned away, they could die, they're turned away. Title 42 is the primary offender at the moment. It is a policy that was put in place actually at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, and it entirely closed the border to asylum seekers, ostensibly to prevent the spread of COVID. But now it's over 2 years later, we've got vaccines, we've got testing, we've got masks, we've got, basically no coronavirus regulations in place anywhere else in the country. And also the border is open to tourists, to shoppers, to commerce, to everyone except one group of people, which is asylum seekers who are fleeing for their lives, families, women, children. And so what's happening right now, and I'm bringing it up because it is such the issue of the week. What's happening right now is that the Biden administration announced that they will lift Title 42 on May 23rd. That announcement set off a political hullabaloo. This is a political hot button issue. And there are now several efforts with people trying to keep Title 42 in place for the long haul, basically because it's a convenient way maybe to just block people from coming in over the border. So there's both legislation, senators trying to keep it in place, and there's judges, federal judges, there's litigation trying to force the Biden administration to keep it in place. I used to think this was a partisan issue with, one party lining up on one side and one party lining up on the other, but it is turning out to be not the case because there are people of both parties coming out in support of keeping Title 42 in place at the border. Is a bipartisan effort. We are losing. And so I want to really encourage you to make the phone calls to senators, to make us think about this, to make phone calls to members of Congress, and more than anything, over the course of this election season, as candidates try to use this issue as a way to gain voters or to kind of play it safe, what they think is safe, make sure that they know that you as a voter want to see them take the position that supporting asylum at the border. Ask candidates where they stand on it. Ask them what they will do to support asylum. So that's one thing, because that's just we're really expecting this to come to a head at the beginning of next week. So we really encourage you to get involved in advocacy. So in terms of, I'm just going to switch over, like I said, I'm going to jump around. In terms of resettlement, I mean, Brenda and Anne really explained what we are all working on. We're all doing similar work to support both the 76,000 Afghans who were brought here in August, and then the people who are now coming at a slower pace, and to newly support Ukrainians. So I can answer questions about those programs and what HIAS is doing specifically on those programs. But since it's coming, I want to say another thing, which is that, of course, Afghans and Ukrainians do need this support, but the US refugee resettlement was not created for two nationalities. It was created as a way to be able to, provide a pathway for the most needy people who really need the support in coming here, regardless of whether they are coming from the world's largest refugee crises or the most urgent, front page of the New York Times, crises, regardless of whether or not the US has a political interest in the conflict. But what has happened is, of course, it takes a toll on the US refugee program in general. And last year, in addition to the large number of Afghans that we all welcomed, and we are all very proud of the work that we did around that and are continuing to do around that. But in addition to that, there were only 8,000 people welcomed from anywhere else in the world. So that is something that I just want to raise, because there is an equity issue at play that we should just be aware of, because even as we prepare to welcome Ukrainians and we continue to welcome Afghans, which we absolutely absolutely need to be doing and should be doing. We should have this voice in our head. Why is there a pathway for Ukrainians to come in an expedited way, but Central American asylum seekers are completely barred at the border? Why are Haitians being deported every single day on flights? You know, who is being harmed when we prioritize certain applications over others? So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there and say that that type of advocacy is really advocacy for the health of the U.S. refugee admissions program in general, I want you to, you know, Holly told me to talk about advocacy. So I just really want to encourage you to be part of that advocacy as well, even as you're supporting, you know, refugees coming in, that you're also engaging with kind of some of the bigger picture advocacy that we're doing for the program. So that is, I think that's all I have. I'm happy to yield the rest of the time.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I will make no comment because I have a lot of comments about what you're about to say. We're going to turn this over to Ruth from WJCI, who will read us some questions out of the chat for you to answer.
First, thank you so much. This was really helpful. But there's still a huge amount of confusion about the definition of a host group, a sponsorship, or welcoming circle. Can any of you help us with defining these terms, because they're all being bandied about?
Absolutely. So I will take a first stab at it, and then Rebecca and Brenda, feel free to add clarity wherever you see an opportunity. So I think the first thing to really keep in mind is to think about whether or not there is federal money involved in what you're getting to do with a family. And I know that sounds like a really crass question, but it's not so much the name of the program, but whether or not there are funds that are coming initially with the family. And that defines how much paperwork you as volunteers end up having to do, to be perfectly honest. It sounds like a basic thing, but it really is. So when you talk about partnering with an agency like ours, IRIS, or with IRC or Rebecca at HIAS, and you want to do co-sponsorship, which is welcoming a family no matter what nationality, right? And a family that has come through the federal screening program, and there's a little bit of funds attached to it, that resettlement effort, because they are coming through that federal program. That is called co-sponsorship. You're partnering with the agency, with the federal government, and with the family. And our different organizations may have different names for it, but when it comes to the federal government contract, and when they give money to the agency and to your group to help with those initial tasks of welcome, that defines co-sponsorship, and it includes everything that's needed in that initial resettlement period. So different agencies may have a different name for that, but that's the key thing that makes the difference. You've heard recently of a program called Sponsor Circles, and that is a particular organization that has been started by the Community Sponsorship Hub. SponsorCircles.org is a program that unshackles the group of volunteers from any federal funds. And why would the federal government do that? Well, they were in an emergency situation this past fall. They had brought too many folks in too fast for our agencies to handle when we have to do the mountain of paperwork, rapid fire. We could barely get people into hotels fast enough. So they knew they had to do something to literally unleash the American public and let them help faster, because they had all these people without homes, right? And US military bases are really not set up for schools and jobs. So SponsorCircles.org was an emergency answer to unshackle from the federal funds. So when you do a sponsor circle through that program, And it's been for Afghans. There is talk, and it will hopefully get finalized super soon about it being a possibility with this new population of Ukrainians. But when you do that, your group, whether you want to call it a circle, your group, comes together, but they have to raise the funds themselves, and there will not be any federal funds coming. So the group does it, they get guidance, they get one of our agencies to answer questions, but it's not as involved from the agencies because there are no federal funds involved, but there is some guidance that is given. So that's sponsorcircles.org. The other thing is co-sponsorship that has a little bit of federal funds, but our different agencies may call it something different. At IRIS, we keep the clunky language, right? Straight out of the cooperative agreement, straight out of the contract with the government, just because we're old school. But some of the other agencies say, okay, the group maybe doesn't want all of those responsibilities. So let's take co-sponsorship and take 80% of the responsibilities and 80% of the paperwork and call it a host group or something like that. They give co-sponsorship a different name. They might make it a slightly easier lift for your group. So the key thing is when you're talking to one of the organizations like ours is to ask, are there going to be federal funds involved? Because maybe you're a group that says, I want to do this, but I want a backstop. I want an organization that's going to have a case manager that can answer questions. And I don't think we want to do it all on our own financially. We want to have a little more of those federal funds involved. That's going the way of co-sponsorship, which you can do with any one of our agencies. Sponsor circles, unshackled from that federal government money, not from the federal government itself. You still have to be approved by them, but it gets unshackled from the money, but you also don't have as many forms to do. But you also don't have a really firm everyday backup. Somebody will answer questions for you, but it's different from having a case manager. So I'm going to stop there. Brenda, Rebecca, feel free to add clarity.
That was a really great way of putting it, Anne. I just want to say that we are one of the offenders that Anne talked about in changing the wording of the names of the groups. So it's the right thing to do to just learn the details of the program, because it actually drives me crazy. Why do these programs all sound the same? Sponsor circles, co-sponsor, it really drives me crazy. So, but they're all very similar. And the main thing is if you have a group of volunteers, a core group that is, ready to put in some serious volunteer hours and time, and to take on the responsibility, and that group, you have the volunteers and you have the ability to fundraise. These models are pretty similar. But I wanted to just add to what Anne said, that when it comes to the Ukrainians, not only is it unshackled from, unshackled from, like, it's one step farther, right? Not only is it unshackled from the federal funding paperwork, it's like really, they decided to run this thing in a totally decentralized way. You could be not connected to a refugee agency at all and sponsor Ukrainian. I'm not saying that that's what I recommend you do. I'm saying that is how it was set up, that, you could just as an individual can sponsor an individual, and there aren't, it could be not connected at all to a refugee agency, and there could be basically no requirements that you're bound to in any way. So, I just wanted to kind of say that you should just do your research and ask questions, but they're all really similar, and we're all delighted to work with groups that are, that are coming together to support refugees.
Thank you, Anne, Rebecca. That was exactly, just right, very descriptive, covered all the nuances. I will say, talking about this federal funds, each individual gets $1,225 per person in the case. And as you all know, that does not go a long way, especially not in New York. And so the support of these groups, whatever name our organizations call them, is huge for these families, and it really makes a big difference. So thank you all for those who have volunteered to resettle families. It's make a big difference in their lives.
So if I could just add one more piece, somebody asked in the chat about host groups. So host groups, I would actually need to know like which organization had used that term with you. And I would have to talk to that organization to say what they were attaching it to, because host group is not a term that the federal government uses. So it's not in the contracts that our organizations have. And so it would literally take me having a conversation with the organization that was saying that was their model in order to tell you what the requirements are. What I can tell you for certain is that the term fiscal sponsor is what the federal government uses when it refers to, right now, the Ukrainians that are coming through humanitarian parole. So being a fiscal sponsor could be a group, could be an individual. They have to commit to the financial commitment of the duration of the humanitarian paroles. So it's like 2 years, and there's a specific dollar amount per person that you have to apply. You have to provide proof of having that income already. Not you're going to earn it, I don't believe. So that's fiscal sponsor. And then we talked about co-sponsorship in this big agreement that we all have with the federal government. And then we talked about sponsor circles, right? So host groups is not a name that the federal government uses. It would be something that an organization has said to you, or you think they said to you. That happens a lot too, where our brains just take something and turn it into something else. So literally that happens too, where people will come to us and say, what about this name? Do you do this program? I'm like, what's that? So if you can, whoever had asked that question was Andrea or otherwise, if you can send me a link or send us a link to where you saw that, then we can dig down for you. And one of the three of us can come back with an answer on that.
And we actually do that, but we are not a resettlement, organization or group. So that's what we do call the groups that we fund. WJCI.
There you go. So
there's a difference there in terms of funding versus the actual.
So that's actually, Holly, that's great to know, because that is a great example of where that name for a group of volunteers that wants to provide welcome to a family was given a name by a different organization, and you've actually potentially made funds available to them, right? But when those host groups with that little bit of private funding, right? Once they get themselves organized, they can attach to different organizations, one of ours on the screen or other ones, or straight to the federal government, to then get involved in becoming fill in the blank, either a fiscal sponsor or a co-sponsor with one of our organizations, or they could go on to be a sponsor circle. There's a good example of that where Holly helped a group. Oh, Holly, what's Harv's group's name? I forget.
It's Afghan 100.
Yeah, Afghan 100.
Afghan 100 of Kingston, I think.
So this is a good illustration for everybody. There's this really nice man named Harv, and he first approached Iris about becoming a co-sponsor. And I had 2 conversations with him. He has lots of people in his group that have lots of international experience. And he really wasn't concerned about a number of the different things like that a lot of groups will be concerned about. And they really weren't interested in, needing a backstop, right? They didn't really feel like they needed, an agency to call upon, because they'd done a lot of, deep international work individually, living overseas and helping disadvantaged populations. So once he and I spoke, I said, Harv, you really ought to think about whether or not you go the sponsor circles route, because y'all seem pretty independent, right? And pretty experienced. So you might want to consider that route. And as you go through that, if you decide you want to come back our route through co-sponsorship, that's okay too. But they ended up going the sponsor circles route. And I think they were approved by HIAS, right? And they're waiting for a placement. So that just to try to illustrate that. So that's a group that started out as a host group, right? In the Westchester Jewish Coalition Initiative language, right? As a host group, got a little funding, thought they wanted to attach to the federal funds through co-sponsorship. But then after thinking about it, they're like, yeah, I don't think we need to do that. Let's unshackle from that. We've got plenty of money and let's try this other route. They still had to go through a little approval process and training, let's be clear, but they ended up as a sponsor circle.
And have successfully resettled Afghans to date.
Oh, they got families? Oh, yeah, that's so exciting. I didn't know that. Yay.
Yeah, they have.
Sorry. I hope I didn't talk too much. Sorry.
Definitely not. We loved hearing everything you say. One more question. Will refugees from Ukraine coming through humanitarian parole be able to apply for asylum? And if not, will they have any way to stay in the US beyond the 2 years? And will any of your groups be providing assistance with applications for asylum or some other kinds of visas?
I'd love to take this one if Anne and Brenda don't mind. So this is one of my biggest problems with this Uniting for Ukraine program. It is being set, sorry, I could go on. I could write a book about questions that I have about this Uniting for Ukraine program. But there's an assumption that people want to come here temporarily to escape the war and go back home. And they're being given a 2-year parole, which is not an immigration status. They're being paroled here for 2 years. And then the idea is that they would go back. And I think that's probably a faulty assumption on behalf of the Biden administration, because maybe that might be true for some people, but I think there's probably going to be people who do want to stay in the United States. Of course, they can apply for asylum. Anyone can apply for asylum, but I will say that their cases will not be particularly strong asylum claims. Fleeing from war, it's actually not on the list of, of asylum, things that make you eligible for asylum, believe it or not, because you're not being persecuted as an individual or as a particular group of individuals. It's not like, religious persecution in nature. It's not it's not like a subset of the country. So just kind of generally fleeing from a war zone, weirdly, right? But it isn't actually a particularly strong asylum claim. So I do want to say that, anyone can apply for asylum, but that will be a difficult thing to do. What I think we will need to really start talking about soon is a Ukraine Adjustment Act. Many of you were involved with our advocacy for an Afghan Adjustment Act that would change the status of people coming in through that program, just change it all from humanitarian parole to a legal permanent residency. That's probably going to need to happen for this Ukrainian population as well, because this is not going to be a tenable situation. And and also it'll just add to the asylum backlog if you have to have 100,000 people applying for asylum. So I do think that what we're probably looking at is needing to do something like that. But of course, organizations like ours will all be supporting people on an individual level, but I do think it also will require a systemic solution.
Thank you. Holly, do you want to talk for a bit? Holly?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yes. Yep.
There were many things going on my screen. Hence the typo in the chat box, because there were too many things going on. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone. I learned so much tonight. You never know enough in this space. It's ongoing. There's so much to pick up, and everything changes so fast. And that was a great education for everyone here in our community. Some of whom are doing the work. I see so many familiar names tonight and faces. And so I want to give you a quick update about WJCI. So earlier this year, we partnered with UJA and the Shapiro Foundation to resettle Afghan refugees. We are an organization that mobilizes, educates, advocates, and we offer social actions to our community that benefit immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. So since January, we've funded 8 host groups. Some of you are here tonight from these groups, and they have all been successfully providing safe havens for Afghan families. Though one of our groups is waiting for their families to be released by the UAE, where 12,000 Afghans remain stuck. We remain dedicated to Afghan refugees. And we know that many more are coming onto our shores, and we are here to support them. With these new host groups, WJCI's reach has extended well beyond Westchester. And we're proud to work daily with Jewish and interfaith communities across our region, offering ways to help immigrants by making donations, doing service work, advocating for human rights, and other offering concrete actions that help improve lives of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And after having a presence in 45 synagogues, religious schools, and colleges in the span of just 2 or 3 weeks back in March during Refugee Shabbat, powered by HIAS, we are now successfully bringing synagogues and other congregations into the work of helping immigrants in so many ways. And as a mobilizer, we've just now brought 6 local synagogues and a church together to form a new host group, who have just put their application into HIAS and are waiting for their first Afghan family. And Wendy, I know you're on the call, and I'm so glad that you're here. She's one of the leaders of that group. So like all of you, our hearts ached as we watched Kabul fall, and they still ache. So like I said, we're not giving up on bringing Afghan refugees to safety. I put a link if you're interested, please do fill it out. There's let us know that you're interested in forming a host group. And that's what we do. We mentor, we provide guidance. We will be on the phone with you day in, day out until you're ready to put that application in. And so I hope you do that. And if you are in a group and you're expecting more Afghan refugees, let us know, because we want you to apply for our microgrant. And of course, our hearts ache for Ukraine. We all come from places in Eastern Europe. A lot of us on this call, myself, Poland, Russia, this hits home in ways that are hard to explain, but we all understand. And we at WJCI hear about new Ukrainian arrivals every day. And we recently collaborated with Neighbors for Refugees to welcome 2 Ukrainian families who are now safely in Westchester. One is living in Mount Vernon and is being supported by Neighbors for Refugees and Sinai Free Synagogue. And another mother and son arrived in my town, Larchmont, this weekend. And they're being supported by Westchester Jewish Center, Larchmont Temple, and again, Neighbors for Refugees. This has been an amazing thing to watch. Last night I was on a call with 30 people who just stepped up yesterday, who said they have to help this mother and son. And you heard it's complicated bringing Ukrainians here, but it's not impossible. There are ways to help them. We're getting calls to offer assistance from all over the place: pro bono lawyers, real estate brokers, landlords. We actually had a call recently with a landlord who very generously wants to provide discounted rent for quite a long time. And there are other landlords doing that right now too. So, and we also got a call to find a Jewish sleepaway camp for a Ukrainian girl living in Germany. Reached out to a local rabbi. Actually, rabbi reached out to me, and within probably days, we had a Jewish sleepaway camp paid for with flights and everything for this young girl coming here this summer. So everyone is being so generous. And we're, like I said, we're a connector. We will, if you want to get involved, we're going to get you involved. You can either form a host group. You can do something even smaller by buying something on Amazon list, but we're going to give you ways to help. So that's what WJCI is doing. I want to say thank you to many WJCIers who are on the call tonight: Ruth, Andrea, Alan, Howard, Marty, for everything you guys do. And for everyone who came tonight, we are also having a special World Refugee Day event on June 20th at the JCC in Shames. You all on this call have an interesting story about your refugee past, about refugees you're caring for. And this will be a time when we can share our stories. So I hope that we'll be sending details out about that. I hope you can come. And I want to thank all of our partners who came tonight. I want to thank everyone who helped, Marty, Ruth, everyone who's here for spending an hour tonight. I hope that you all got great information. There are questions still piling in. I don't want to cut everyone off. So what we'll do is we'll save the chat, we'll answer your questions, and we'll keep talking. And remember, we're here for anything you need.
Will you send us the link to the recording?
We'll send a link to the recording. We'll send you
because I had to
link to the chat box. Like Rebecca said, there is a lot to advocate for, and that's important. And there are a lot of links in the chat box we'll send that you can click and get scripts to your senators and your congressmen and so forth. So with that, I'm going to end the evening. I hope you have a great night. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your support. Thank you so much, everybody, for caring. And thank you for your compassion. That's the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you all for staying.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to our
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.